Hi everyone. This video covers some of the highlights from René Descartes' first meditation, which was written in 1641. Descartes' meditations are an attack on medieval scholastic philosophy and its reliance on Aristotelian final causes and the senses. His goal is to replace Aristotelian science with a mechanistic science. He also wants to establish a more certain foundation for philosophy and theology and the sciences, one that is not subject to doubt. So he wants to prove the existence of God here, and he also wants to discuss the nature of the soul. I will leave a link to the version that I'm using here on the screen. I'll leave it down below in the description. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first chapter, or the first meditation. He says, "Several years have now elapsed since I first became aware that I had accepted, even from my youth, many false opinions for true, and that consequently what I afterward based on such principles was highly doubtful. And from that time I was convinced of the necessity of undertaking once in my life to rid myself of all the opinions I had adopted, and of commencing anew the work of building from the foundation, if I desired to establish a firm and abiding superstructure in the sciences." So what he's saying here is that he's going to try to remove all of these preconceived opinions that he has, that have cropped up over his lifetime, that have been unquestioned, and he thinks many of them are false. He wants to apply this method of doubt to his enterprise here to show that eventually he's going to try to find if there's something out there in the world that he can be absolutely certain of. So he wants to get through all of these beliefs that he has taken on through his life. And really, this is a good philosophical endeavor, right? This is what we do in philosophy. We try to separate opinions from facts. We try to get to what is true or what is certain, and that's what he's doing here. He says, "All that I have up to this moment accepted as possessed of the highest truth and certainty, I received either from or through the senses. I observed, however, that these sometimes misled us, and it is the part of prudence not to place absolute confidence in that by which we have even once been deceived." So here, he's not going to continue by looking at particular beliefs. He's going to back up and look at more basic beliefs, more foundational beliefs. So the beliefs that he derives from his senses. He's going to call into question our very senses to say here that we can't trust them, right? There are times, and we've all experienced this, when we thought we saw something, we believed for example, we saw a snake when actually it was a stick or something like that. Our senses deceived us. He's saying because these senses sometimes mislead us, then we need to be really careful about them. He continues, "There are yet many other of their informations of the truth of which it is manifestly impossible to doubt, as for example that I am in this place, seated by this fire, clothed in a winter dressing gown, that I hold in my hands this piece of paper." So he's taking on some old and tried skeptical arguments. He comes back with this quote here saying, look, it seems like we shouldn't doubt our simple sense perceptions, but then he concludes that actually, he says this, "How often have I dreamt that I was in these familiar circumstances, that I was dressed and occupied this place by the fire when I was lying undressed in bed." So in other words, how often did I think I was in one place when actually I was just dreaming I was in that place? I was certain I was in that place, but I actually wasn't. I was just dreaming it. He says, "I perceive so clearly that there exist no certain marks by which the state of waking can ever be distinguished from sleep." So he has moved from a mild skepticism, those skeptical arguments that were common in his day, to this absolute or extreme skepticism where he's undermined any possibility of being absolutely certain that his senses are reliable or true. He has no way of knowing, according to this here, that what he perceives is true and not just another dream state. Something for you to think about. Is that true? Do you think that there is really no certain mark by which you can discern whether you're dreaming or awake? he continues. So now he's considered our a posteriori beliefs, which are just empirical beliefs. He's considered the senses and he set those aside. He says basically he cannot trust these, at least for absolute uncertainty. But what about our a priori beliefs? These are beliefs or knowledge that comes prior to our experience. Examples of these include math and geometry. He says arithmetic, geometry, and the other sciences of the same class, which regard merely the simplest and most general objects and scarcely inquire whether or not these are really existent, contain somewhat that is certain and indubitable, or not open to doubt. For whether I am awake or dreaming, it remains true that 2 and 3 make 5, and that a square has but 4 sides, nor does it seem possible that truth so apparent can ever fall under a suspicion of falsity. So he thinks that perhaps mathematical truths are certain, and so maybe he can base his new system on that. He continues, how do I know that I am not also deceived each time I add together 2 and 3, or number the sides of a square? He considers, perhaps deity has not been willing that I should be thus deceived, for he is said to be supremely good. If, however, it were repugnant to the goodness of deity to have created me subject to constant deception, it would seem likewise to be contrary to his goodness to allow me to be occasionally deceived, and yet it is clear that this is permitted. So he wants to trust that God would never deceive him about these things, namely his beliefs about numbers, math, and geometry, but he notes that God has allowed him to be deceived before, and so he's not so sure he can trust on that. In fact, he goes even further at the end of the first meditation to say, you know what, let's just be certain about this. Let's imagine that God doesn't exist, a good, omnibenevolent God, but let's imagine that, as he describes it, a malevolent demon has taken his place, and his whole design is out to deceive me. He says, I will suppose then, not that deity who is sovereignly good and the fountain of truth, but that some malignant demon who is at once exceedingly potent and deceitful has employed all his artifice to deceive me. I will suppose that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, figures, sounds, and all external things are nothing better than the illusions of dreams, by means of which this being has laid snares for my credulity. I will consider myself as without hands, eyes, flesh, blood, or any of the senses, and as falsely believing that I am possessed of these. So by imagining that there might be a demon out there trying to deceive him, he says, I can't even trust what is internal to me. I can't even trust colors. I can't even trust mathematics. I can't trust any of these things. Is there anything, he ends this section saying, is there anything that I can be certain about? And he will get to that in the next meditation. I hope you found that helpful.